Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, we're going to talk about more U.S. sanctions, this time sanctioning what many are calling a simple business deal between two countries. So that has the international world questioning the U.S. sanctions. Also, President of Turkey, Erdogan, threatening to close the U.S. Incirlik air base that they're using right now, depending upon those sanctions, whether or not they're going to go through. And we also have a Russian spy ship going along the east coast of the United States that many are wondering, okay, what is Russia doing there as it goes back and forth? So these stories and many more. But first, China is the #1 importer of crude oil, currently breaking records for the amount it is bringing in to the country daily. Now, India, the third largest importer of crude oil, is closely following this trend. And now the two countries are working together to help themselves and others, specifically Asian countries, obtain crude at better prices. Now, questions are being raised as to whether OPEC can hang on to its nearly 60-year control over determining crude oil price and demand, or if they will have to admit defeat.
So China and India are fueling this possible shift in the struggle for world domination of oil markets. Now, both Asian nations have been working closely to form buyers' blocs, buyers' bloc, which could give dramatic bargaining power to oil importers. What the buyers' bloc would do essentially is bargain as a collective group for oil.
Well, in doing this, it will reduce the Saudi-led oil cartel's influence on current oil prices. As it stands right now, Asian countries heavily depend on OPEC countries for their oil requirements. Now, China alone imports over 70% of oil needs. India imports even more at 80%. So combined, they consume almost a fifth of all global oil.
That's a big portion. Well, because of this dependency on Middle East oil producers, they have had the upper hand and have historically set a premium which buyers like China and India have had to pay. Well, the United States and European Union, however, have not been required to pay this extra premium when purchasing oil from OPEC countries. India has lobbied extensively to change this fact, but hasn't gotten anyone to make changes.
Also, by forming this new oil partnership plan, they will be able to make better deals with oil producers and effectively eliminate the premium costs. Now, there are also efforts taking place to invite Japan and South Korea, the world's fourth and fifth biggest oil importers, to join the buyers' bloc. And if they are successful in getting those two nations to join, China and India would then be dictating oil prices, potentially turning the entire global market upside down and over time causing OPEC to lose its power. And that's really what we're hearing a lot in the news is these nations are pretty much done dealing with the U.S. They don't want that the oil dollar there having to be held over their head. They want to make these deals to eliminate that control.
Right, and the United States wants to maintain its hold on the petrodollar, so they're doing everything in their power to prevent that from slipping out from under their control. Well, another fact we haven't discussed yet is who has the largest demand for oil? Well, the U.S. Guzzles 20 million barrels a day in the consumption of oil. China consumes an average of 13.5 million barrels. In India, another 5 million barrels each day. However, China and India's demand for oil growth is growing faster at a faster rate than the United States. Both China and India's oil demands has increased on average at a yearly rate of 5.5%, while the United States demand has only grown 0.5% over the last 10 years.
Also, because oil prices have always been based off of the demand growth trend, it is clear that China and India are maneuvering into the driver's seat to see where oil prices are going now and in the future.
And again, American leaders are trying to use sanctions to bring countries under U.S. control. However, we have seen time and again how this usually backfires. For example, the U.S. sanctioned China. China then turned around and made a natural gas deal with Russia. Likewise, when the U.S. sanctioned Iran, they then got with China and bargained to sell them oil at discounted prices.
Well, the latest announcement coming from the U.S. Senate is to impose sanctions against any country that assists Russia in building the Nordstream 2 pipeline. Now, to be clear, this pipeline will provide Russian gas to Germany. So now U.S. government has decided to sanction an economic exchange between two countries, basically a business deal.
Right. Well, usually sanctions are brought up when there's a concern of national security threat or, of course, some humanitarian concerns. But most people will question this newest sanctioning effort because when you think about it, how does the Russian-German pipeline pose any threats to you or me or to our families, since it is, like you said, just a business deal, no threat to national security, no harm to humanitarian efforts or anything of that nature. So why is the United States so worried about it?
Right. Well, bottom line, it doesn't threaten us nor our families, but it does threaten the petrodollar, and that's what they're not willing to let go. Well, these sanctions have already been approved by the House and the Senate and will most likely be signed by President Trump before the weekend. Then the U.S. will have 60 days to identify any company or any person who assists in the building of that pipeline. Now, anyone that they identified would be threatened with having their U.S. visas taken away and their property rights blocked unless they would agree to stop all work or business relations that have to do with that Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So they're going to put the pressure on these people regardless, and it's going to be interesting to see, especially like what Russia is going to do in this, because they're, they said kind of like Turkey, we're moving forward with this deal, our military deal with Russia. We don't care what you say. So a lot of these countries now, they're to the point where they don't care what U.S. does.
Yeah. I mean, and since they have their own resources and there's a demand for those resources, they're, not left up the creek without a paddle. You have Russia selling oil or natural gas to, China and other Asian countries. So, they don't have any reason to stop what they're doing because there's a demand for their product and they can continue to generate income from it as well as helping other countries in the process. Well, once someone is warned, they would have just 30 days to stop all operations. So now the U.S. government is taking sanctions to a new level. One would think from this example, the U.S. wants to dictate who European countries can do business with.
Of course, this is only one more point of sanctions to add to the United States' long list that it has been imposing on many countries, including Iran. But Iran is not holding back how it feels and is expressing it through their own display of military might, and they're not alone. Now, starting on the 27th of December, Iran, China, and Russia will be holding joint naval exercises for 3 days in the Indian Ocean and also in the Gulf of Oman. And that's the point we're making there, is that these nations, they're joining together and standing up to the United States.
That's right. Well, during the drills, the three countries will be putting their best aquatic naval firepower on display. China has confirmed a guided missile will be accompanying the exercise as a deterrent. So what we're actually seeing here isn't your average military drill. With all the U.S. sanctions taking place, you could say it's more of a political statement these three countries are making.
And of course, we know the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil artery, with 1/5 of the daily oil supply for the entire globe flowing through it every day. But the narrow channel isn't highly flammable only because of the oil that passes through it, but because of the tensions there. Now, the latest such incidents here is when the U.S. blamed Iran. Remember, not too long ago, when they blamed Iran for seizing that British oil tanker, and there was a pretty high tense moment there for a couple days.
That's right. Well, now multiple nations, including the U.S., are sending warships to the Persian Gulf. making things more tense. But when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, they did.
The attack was launched from the north and was unquestionably sponsored by Iran.
Amid all the calls for de-escalation, Iran has now launched an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply.
Having failed at max pressure, Secretary Pompeo's turning to max deceit, blaming Iran won't end disaster.
And there you see those type of moves there, just taunting the other countries there with those type of strikes, you know, seeing who's going to practice restraint or go ahead and push the buttons. Well, while things have seemed to calm down a little, it is clear the U.S. will continue to slap sanctions on everyone they can think of connected to Iran, China, and Russia, thus leaving everyone's finger still on the trigger and pushing them to fight back in their own ways. Through protests in Iran, but also through these drills Iran is saying are for anti-pirate and anti-terrorism preparations, but not related to the Iran sanction crisis.
Well, we're going to turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who is also bringing forth some information as we continue with seeing the nations and they're dealing with these sanctions, but also some things taking place with NATO and also what a lot of countries are seeing as a preparation for World War III, which is on the minds of a lot of people. Larry, what do you have for us?
As the clock ticks forward into a new Roman year, the inevitability of all-out warfare between the world's leading powers could scarcely be more obvious. Red flags were waving this week in the U.S. after a Russian spy ship was reportedly spotted off the East Coast. Reports say that for the last 4 years, the reconnaissance vessel has been prowling near several U.S. Navy bases as a direct result, analysts say, of President Putin's ambition to send a message to America and NATO concerning several of Russia's bases that are situated in the Baltic and Black Seas. The situation between America and its shaky ally, Turkey, does not seem to be simmering down or settling just yet. There was more back and forth between the two recently after U.S. legislators expressed approval for Turkish sanctions. President Erdogan hit back by saying that if Ankara has to close down Incirlik and Karaçik, then it will. Both of the aforementioned are U.S. bases located in Turkey, one of which, Incirlik, currently houses 50 U.S. nuclear missiles. Defense Secretary Mike Esper cautioned the Turkish leader to think about whether or not his position was in the best interest of the alliance. The issue for American higher-ups is that despite pressure and repeated threats, Ankara has still not removed itself from dealings with Russia. It was allegedly because of the threat posed by Russia and the Soviet Union that the birth of NATO was a necessity. With the disintegration of the Warsaw Pact in the 1990s, however, analysts say NATO should have itself become defunct, but it has hung around by playing up the idea of prevention, presumably by maintaining a show of military strength. Observers argue that the only thing truly under threat and being attacked in all of this are the pocketbooks of working-class Americans who are bankrolling NATO's operations through taxation. Still in all, however, Russia sees the organization's actions, including its recent military drills in Norway, as hostile, and they believe that the alliance is preparing for large-scale war. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, we know that war is certainly big business, and there's a lot of people that want their hand in that business.
Right.
Well, in 2010, the 10 richest people in the world had a total reported wealth of $296 billion compared to $822 billion today. Now, Oxfam reported that the 26 richest people in the world own the same wealth as the poorest half of the entire world. And Katan, sadly, many people are just a little better off today than they were 10 years ago as compared to that very minute percentile, the 26 there, that gained what, over $500 billion in the last 10 years.
Talk about an uneven distribution of wealth and resources. Well, the topic of a multipolar world has some concern because the consensus is that the U.S. loses while others gain. Well, James Jutras, a former U.S. diplomat, said in an interview with RT's Crosstalk, he said that a multipolar world is a de facto thing, but that is the last thing the establishment in Washington wants to admit, because they are still committed to this unipolar notion that emerged with the end of the First Cold War and in the early 1990s. The idea that the U.S. is the unipower, the only legitimate great power, and the other ones, referring to other countries, have no alternative but to accommodate themselves to the wishes and dictates of Washington.
Well, he continued, and even when that policy has failed, like in Ukraine or Syria, and they cannot let go of this notion that other powers do not have to ask a mother may I every time they want to do something that is in their national interest. So this is something that the people inside the establishment in Washington just cannot admit to themselves.
Well, another guest, Brian Becker, with the Answer Coalition, spoke concerning this move towards multipolarity, saying, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the white paper document made clear that the U.S. wasn't going to have a peace dividend. That because the World War was over, the Warsaw Pact was demolished, and NATO could be disarmed, and the U.S. could use all that money spent on militarism and war to help human beings pay for health care or affordable housing.
Well, what the white paper established was that the U.S. must now seek to carry out unipolar dominance over all other potential rivals in the world. The letter says very clearly, we will allow no other potential rival to challenge U.S. dominance, and that's been the operational principle for the last 27 years. But it's come apart because the U.S. got bogged down in the wars in the Middle East, while China came up and Russia got back on its feet. And that was, just to add to what he was saying, if you remember how we talked about, these other countries have advanced quite a bit militarily, while the U.S. hasn't, because the U.S. has been busy having their hands in all these other parts of the world, while countries like China and Russia have been keeping to themselves, quietly developing their own military, advancements there, when the U.S. is stretching itself thin.
Yeah, kind of like the beast silently growing in the dark, as the United States seeks to stretch its dominance throughout the world, like you just said, quietly the Russia, the sleeping bear, is becoming a sleeping giant or a waking giant once again, along with this counterpart, China, as well as other nations in Asia. Well, China and Russia have said that our growth doesn't have to be at the U.S.'s expense. We can make this a win-win situation for everyone. Jetra said that the U.S. could be the leading power while recognizing other countries and their contributions, just as Britain was a leading power during the 19th century. But he said that's not good enough. The U.S. has to have absolute dominance while denying legitimacy to the other powers.
Well, regarding war and the weapons treaties that govern nuclear weapons, most of the previous treaties have expired or have just been dissolved, and despite the opposition of other nations, NATO has recently declared outer space as its new domain for war. Now, the U.S. believes that it can gain military supremacy and dominance in these different war-fighting domains, and that's what the U.S. has been forced to abandon during the that's what the U.S. had been forced to abandon during the Cold War, once the Soviet Union achieved a basic parity with the United States.
So the scales were pretty much even at that time. Well, he continued, the idea of mutually assured destruction is gone. Now it's full spectrum dominance and military supremacy as the operational doctrine of the Pentagon. And of course, this sets the stage for global war. Now, he said war is good for business, right? And as the politicians, they actually know this, and this is why they're not fighting against this. The U.S. is thinking that it must use military force to maintain unipolar dominance over the world, and that, he said, is just a recipe for disaster. And as we've had many examples in times past with different empires, history has shown us that force, although it might work for a little while, it eventually backfires on the country. And we're seeing, like we just mentioned in these articles, these other nations are building up strength and power because they refuse to be dominated by the United States and saying, hey, you do what we say or we're going to put sanctions on you and prevent you from actually having some type of a strong economy, and you're causing your people to suffer. They're saying, no, we're not going to lay down and take this. We're going to stand up, have our own economy, and separate ourselves from the United States so that we can interact with the free world.
Yeah, and that's really going to be probably the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, with the United States, is when these countries like the Nordstream 2 pipeline, when they start doing their gas and oil trading without the United States involvement. That's when I think we're going to see what the United States, is going to have to make a decision. What do we do? Do we lose that dominance, or do we go to war? Right. So, at that time, it's sad, but all this about the supremacy and the dominance is not considering at all how mankind is going to suffer as a result of this World War III nuclear war that's coming.
Yeah, because that's really the only option that we have. The conventional wars no longer are going to be fought. It's going to be nuclear, with Russia unleashing its latest hypersonic missile, which the United States says we have no defense against. It's kind of almost a game over for anybody who's involved in this, even people who aren't involved in the nuclear war. Well, we know that the nations right now are preparing for war, and you can actually prepare for life and peace and safety through following what is known as the peaceful solution. Well, to find out more about the peaceful solution and actually what the scriptures direct you to know regarding saving yourself and your family from these upcoming prophesied wars, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website if you'd like to by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, there is 2 Bible study tools on the market. They're absolutely free. One is the Yisrael Says program, which you can find more and learn more about by going to yisraelsays.com. And the other one is the Ask Yisrael program by going to askyisrael.com. Now, both of them, they have search bars there where you can type in anything you want to search and find the latest information coming right from the books of Israel, the Book of Yahweh, and other publications from the House of Yahweh, guaranteed to give you hours of Bible study that you'll be certainly glad you looked into.
Well, get your paper, pencil, and your Holy Scriptures, because up next, informative information that's going to benefit you and your family for a long time to come, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.